The Memphis night hummed with a rhythm all its own, a deep, soulful beat that Elvis Presley knew better than anyone. He sat in the backseat of his Cadillac, a silent king in a velvet kingdom, watching the neon signs bleed color onto the rain-slicked streets. Earlier, he'd been on stage, a dazzling meteor of sound and light pouring his heart out to thousands of screaming fans. Now the roar of the crowd had faded, replaced by the hushed whispers of the city and the constant, nagging hum of his own thoughts. Fame was a strange beast. It gave you everything. It gave him the gold-lame suits, the roaring Cadillacs, and the beautiful Graceland. But it took away the simple freedom of a walk in the park, the quiet peace of anonymity, the chance to just be without 1,000 eyes following every move. Sometimes all he wanted was to feel the ground beneath his feet, to breathe in the cool night air without a bodyguard shadowing his every breath. Tonight was one of those nights. "Pull over, Red," Elvis said, his voice a low rumble. Red West, his friend and bodyguard, looked back, a frown creasing his brow. "Right here, King. It ain't the best part of town for a stroll." Elvis just smiled, a weary, knowing smile. "Just for a bit, I need to clear my head, walk a little." Red knew that look. It was the look that said Elvis wasn't asking, he was stating. He pulled the car over near a quiet, dimly lit alleyway, a place that felt a million miles from the bright lights of the stage. "All right, but I'm right behind you, Elvis, and keep it quick." Elvis nodded, already opening the door. He stepped out, and the cool air, thick with the scent of damp earth and distant barbecue, wrapped around him like a welcome blanket. Pulled his collar up, hoping to blend in, though he knew it was a foolish hope. His presence, even in the shadows, felt too big for the world to ignore. He started walking, his steps slow and deliberate. He wasn't thinking about the next record, the next movie, or the millions of fans. He was thinking about the stillness, the quiet strength that he found in his other world, the world of martial arts. For years, Elvis had been deeply immersed in karate. It wasn't just a hobby. It was a discipline, a philosophy that grounded him amidst the chaos of his life. His sensei, a stern but wise man, had taught him not just the punches and kicks, but the inner peace, the control, the understanding of his own body and spirit. He'd learned that true strength wasn't about hurting others, but about mastering oneself. It was about knowing when to strike, yes, but more importantly, when to defend, when to deflect, when to simply be unmovable. He remembered countless hours spent in the dojo, sweat dripping down his brow, pushing his body to its limits. He'd found a profound sense of purpose there, a quiet confidence that fame could never truly give him on stage. He was a performer. In the dojo, he was a student, a seeker of balance and power. And sometimes in moments like these, walking alone in the Memphis night, he felt that power thrumming beneath his skin, a secret anchor in a storm of adoration. As he walked, a subtle shift in the atmosphere caught his attention. The streetlights seemed to dim slightly, and the distant city hum felt closer, more defined. He noticed a group of figures huddled in the deeper shadows of a building across the street. They were young, perhaps teenagers, dressed in clothes that spoke of rebellion and restlessness. Their postures were aggressive, their movements quick and jerky. He felt the familiar prickle of recognition, the instinctual awareness that came from years of being in the public eye. And from his training, these weren't fans. These weren't autograph seekers. These were young men looking for something, and usually what they were looking for wasn't good. Elvis didn't speed up. He didn't slow down. He maintained his steady, measured pace, his gaze straight ahead. He knew that showing fear or appearing to flee could often invite trouble. He had learned that confidence, even in the face of a potential threat, was its own form of defense. He simply continued to walk. A king in his own world, even in the unassuming quiet of a Memphis street. He was just an ordinary man taking a walk, seeking a moment of peace. That was what he wanted to be, just for a few precious minutes. But the world, it seemed, had other plans for Elvis Presley. From the corner of his eye, he saw them stir. One of them, a tall kid, with a sleeveless denim jacket, straightened up. He nudged another, pointing subtly in Elvis's direction. A low murmur rippled through the group. They had seen him. They knew who he was. The peace he had sought was about to be shattered. A strange mix of disappointment and quiet readiness settled over him. Disappointment that his brief escape was over, and readiness for whatever might come next. He took a deep breath, the Memphis air filling his lungs, and prepared himself. He might be Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll. But tonight he was also something else entirely. He was a student of discipline. He was a martial artist, and he was ready. Red West, ever vigilant, was still several car lengths behind. Trying to find a place to pull over properly, he hadn't seen the group emerge from the shadows. Yet, Elvis was alone. Truly alone. For the first time in what felt like forever, the silence around him stretched tight and expectant. The Memphis night held its breath, and then the shadows began to move. Jimmy, the youngest of the crew, shivered, but not from the chill in the air. He shivered from the sudden rush of adrenaline that coursed through him when Big Mike, the leader, whispered, "Look who it is, boys. The king himself." They had been lounging in the alley, bored and restless, looking for something, anything to break the monotony of their existence. Petty mischief, a quick score, a thrill. Their usual targets were easy marks, unsuspecting folks who wouldn't put up a fight. But this was different. This was Elvis. Big Mike, a burly kid with a sneer that seemed permanently etched on his face, puffed out his chest. "What's he doing walking around here like he owns the place?" he muttered, though his eyes held a mix of awe and contempt. He saw Elvis as just another rich guy, soft and out of touch, someone ripe for the picking. Bet he's got a fat wallet on him, or maybe some fancy jewelry. Slick, lean, and quick grinned, rubbing his hands together. "Easy pickings, Mike. He ain't got no bodyguards with him, just strolling like he's in Graceland." That was the thing that fueled their confidence. Elvis was famous, sure, but he was a singer, a performer, not a fighter, and they were 5 strong. Big Mike, Slick, Grunt, Knuckles, and Jimmy. They were tough, street-hardened, and they believed they were unstoppable when they moved as a unit. "Let's teach him a lesson about walking in our territory," Big Mike decided, his voice growing louder, bolder. He started to walk out of the alley directly into Elvis's path. The others followed, fanning out, forming a loose semicircle, effectively blocking Elvis's way forward. Elvis stopped. He didn't flinch. He didn't show a single flicker of fear. His eyes in the dim light seemed to pierce through the shadows, landing on each of them one by one. Jimmy felt a strange sensation. Like Elvis was looking right into his soul, seeing everything he was and everything he wasn't. It was unnerving. Big Mike took another step closer, his hands shoved into his pockets, trying to appear nonchalant. But his stance was cruelly aggressive. Well, if it ain't the king of rock and roll," he drawled, his voice dripping with mock respect. "Lost your way, old man." Elvis's gaze remained steady. "No, son. Just taking a walk." His voice was calm, a deep baritone that held a surprising lack of emotion. It wasn't dismissive, but it wasn't inviting either. It was just there. Slick snickered. "A walk in this neighborhood, you must be mighty brave or mighty stupid." Knuckles, a thick-set boy with perpetually clenched fists, took a step forward, trying to intimidate. "Maybe he's got too much money and needs to share the wealth. Hey, Mike?" Elvis's eyes narrowed just slightly, but his expression remained unreadable. He wasn't looking at their faces, but at their posture, their hands, their balance. He was assessing calmly, taking in the situation, as if this were just another training exercise. Big Mike finally pulled his hands from his pockets, clenching them into fists. "Look, Mr. Presley," he said, his voice hardening. "We don't want any trouble. Just hand over your wallet, and you can be on your way." Jimmy felt his heart pound. This was it, the moment of confrontation. Usually people just handed over their stuff, terrified. Part of them hoped he would, so they could just be done with it. Another part of him a part he didn't understand, felt a strange regret that this was happening. Elvis let out a slow, controlled breath. "I don't carry much cash," he said, his voice still even. "And my watch, it's a gift." "A gift? You think we care about your sentimental junk? We want what's ours." Took another aggressive step, invading Elvis's personal space. "Now, are you going to make this easy, or are we going to have to teach you some manners?" This was their standard playbook. Intimidation, a veiled threat, then a quick, overwhelming show of force. They expected him to back down, to be afraid, to become small. But Elvis didn't back down. He didn't even shift his weight. He simply stood there, a silent rock in the tide of their aggression. His stillness was almost more unsettling than any outburst. "I prefer to solve things peacefully," Elvis said, his gaze unwavering. "But I also believe in self-defense," Big Mike scoffed. "Self-defense? What's a singer gonna do? Sing us a lullaby?" He raised his fist, clearly intending to throw the first punch to deliver a quick, decisive blow that would end the charade. Slick and Knuckles moved in from either side, ready to swarm him if he resisted. Grunt and Jimmy were positioned to block any escape. The air crackled with tension. Jimmy braced himself for the inevitable, for the messy, one-sided fight he'd seen a dozen times before. He expected Elvis to crumble, to yell, to finally show fear, but then something happened. Big Mike's fist was already in motion, aimed directly at Elvis's face. It was fast, powerful, too fast to react, or so Jimmy thought. But just as the punch was about to connect, Elvis moved. It was a fluid, almost impossibly smooth shift. His body rotated almost imperceptibly, his arm rising in a blur. The punch didn't land. Instead, Big Mike's arm seemed to bounce off of nothing, his own momentum carrying him forward and off balance. He stumbled, cursing, his eyes wide with surprise. Before he could regain his footing, Elvis's other hand shot out, not in a punch, but in a precise, almost gentle push to Big Mike's shoulder. And Big Mike was clearly out of step. Slick and Knuckles, who had been moving in, froze. Their grins vanished. The easy confidence drained from their faces, replaced by a mixture of confusion and disbelief. The king hadn't just defended himself. He had somehow effortlessly put their toughest guy on the ground without even seeming to try. The Memphis night held its breath, waiting for what would happen next. For a moment, all 5 gang members were frozen in disbelief, eyes glued to Big Mike sprawled on the grimy pavement. He picked himself up slowly, his face a mask of bewildered fury. What the heck was that?" he roared, but there was a tremor in his voice. Elvis remained perfectly still, his posture relaxed, yet ready. He hadn't broken a sweat. He hadn't even raised his voice. "A demonstration, son," he said, his voice calm, almost instructional. "There are better ways to move through life than with a clenched fist, Slick." "Recombering first," sneered. "Lucky punch, King, you ain't so tough." His body pivoted with astonishing speed, his left arm rising like a shield. Slick's punch connected not with Elvis's face, but with his forearm. The impact seemed to absorb into Elvis, nullified by his precise blocking technique. Slick's hand bounced off, jarring his arm up to the shoulder. Before Slick could even register the pain, Elvis's right hand shot out, not with force, but with a surprising lightness, catching Slick's wrist. Then, with an almost imperceptible twist and pull, Elvis used Slick's own momentum against him. Slick found himself being spun around, his arm twisted behind his back, in a lock that wasn't painful but completely debilitating. He let out a yelp of surprise and submission, his body contorting awkwardly. He was suddenly helpless, balanced precariously, unable to move without causing himself extreme discomfort. "Easy now," Elvis murmured, his grip firm but controlled. "No need for all this." Knuckles, seeing his 2 main cohorts neutralized, snarled and charged. He was bigger than Slick, relying on brute force. He threw a clumsy, powerful haymaker, aiming to take Elvis down. But Elvis was no longer just Elvis Presley, the singer. He was a master of kachukunbo, a blended martial art known for its street effectiveness and emphasis on practical self-defense. He moved with the precision of a trained fighter, anticipating the blow. As Knuckles' fist whistled through the air, Elvis stepped inside the arc of the punch, his body turning. He didn't block, he deflected. His hand met Knuckles' arm just above the elbow, guiding the blow harmlessly past him. Then, a lightning-fast movement, Elvis' foot shot out, not in a kick to injure, but to disrupt. It tapped Knuckles' lead leg, a precise pressure point designed to momentarily unbalance Knuckles. Stumbled, his powerful build suddenly clumsy. Before he could recover, Elvis's palm met his chest, a gentle push that felt surprisingly powerful, sending Knuckles staggering backward, tripping over his own feet, and landing in a heap beside Big Mike. 2 down, 3 to go. And the two on the ground were staring up at Elvis, not with anger now, but with a dawning, bewildered respect. Grunt and Jimmy, who had been flanking, watching in utter disbelief, exchanged wide-eyed glances. They had never seen anything like it. This wasn't fighting as they knew it. There were no wild punches, no desperate scrambling. It was like watching a perfectly choreographed dance, but a dance where the opponents kept falling down. Grunt, spurred on by a mix of fear and a desperate need to prove himself, decided to try a different tactic. Pulled out a small switchblade, the dull gleam of the blade catching the street lamp's glow. "Stay back, old man, I'll cut you," he threatened, his voice shaky. Elvis's eyes, which had been calm, hardened infinitesimally. A weapon changed things. His movements became even more precise, even more focused. As Grunt lunged forward, swinging the knife awkwardly, Elvis moved with astonishing speed and economy of motion. He didn't dodge far. He simply shifted, his body turning. His hand shot out, not to block the blade, but to control the arm holding it. A quick, precise grab to Grunt's wrist, a twist, and then a pressure point applied to his elbow. A cry of pain escaped Grunt's lips as his arm twisted and the knife clattered harmlessly to the ground, spinning under the street lamp. Elvis released the pressure but kept Grunt's arm momentarily pinned, gently turning him away from the others. He wasn't hurting Grunt, but he had removed the threat and completely controlled the situation. Grunt stood there, gasping, his arm aching, utterly disarmed and bewildered. Now only Jimmy remained. He hadn't moved. He just stood there, watching, his mouth agape. He had seen a performance, a human tornado of grace and power, disarming a neutral blow. Elvis turned his head slightly, his gaze falling on Jimmy. There was no anger in his eyes, no accusation, only a quiet, knowing look. Jimmy felt a wave of something he couldn't name, shame, awe, wash over him. He felt small, insignificant. "It doesn't have to be like this, son," Elvis said, his voice soft, directed only at Jimmy. "There's a power in discipline, a strength in controlling yourself, not others." Jimmy swallowed hard, his throat dry. He looked at Big Mike, still trying to get up, rubbing his backside. He looked at Slick, nursing his twisted arm, a look of profound shock on his face. He looked at Knuckles, sitting dumbfounded. He looked at Grunt, holding his wrist, staring at the discarded knife as if it were a foreign object. And then he looked back at Elvis, who stood there calm and composed, radiating an aura of quiet strength, not menacing, not triumphant, just present and utterly, completely in control. The sound of an engine drawing closer, a familiar purr, reminded Elvis of Red West. His time alone was nearly up. He looked back at the group, his gaze lingering on Jimmy. For an extra second, a silent message passing between them. Then, with a subtle nod, Elvis turned and walked away his steps, just as unhurried as when he had first started his stroll. He left behind 5 stunned, bewildered young men, picked up their pieces of broken arrogance, and slowly, surely their shattered understanding of strength. The Memphis night had witnessed something extraordinary. A silent, powerful dance that would echo in their minds long after Elvis Presley had vanished into the shadows. The Cadillac's headlights swung around the corner, casting long, fleeting shadows down the street, as Red West finally pulled up alongside Elvis. Red leaned over, rolling down the passenger window, his face a mixture of concern and confusion. "Elvis? What in the world are you, all right? I saw a commotion. Looked like you were surrounded." Elvis simply nodded, stepping into the light, his collar still up. He looked perfectly fine, not a hair out of place, no sign of struggle. It was almost unsettling. "Everything's fine, Red. Just a few young fellas who lost their way." He opened the door and slid into the back seat, the plush interior a sudden contrast to the grimy street. Red glanced back at the alley where the group still stood frozen. "They look mighty confused, King," he murmured, his brow furrowed. "What happened out there?" Elvis smiled faintly, a private, knowing smile. "Just a little lesson in manners, Red. Sometimes you gotta show folks the gentle way." Red, knowing Elvis's deep dedication to his martial arts, didn't push it. Seen Elvis move in the dues, seen the discipline and power. To see it applied on the street against a gang, he just shook his head slowly. "All right, King, whatever you say." Slick, rubbing his wrist, shook his head. "No, he didn't. He just moved me like I was a rag doll." He looked at Knuckles, who was slowly getting to his feet, dusting off his pants. "I don't know what happened," Knuckles mumbled, his usual bravado. "Completely gone. My legs just went out from under me, and then he pushed me, and it was like a truck hit me. But it didn't hurt, not really. Just knocked the wind out." Grunt, still holding his wrist, stared at the switchblade lying on the ground. Bent down slowly, picking it up as if it were a venomous snake. "Took my blade without even touching the blade, just my arm." His voice was a whisper of wonder. He's not human." Jimmy, who had seen everything, felt a strange lightness in his chest, a sensation he couldn't name. It wasn't fear anymore, but something akin to awe. He thought about Elvis's calm eyes, his steady voice. "Doesn't have to be like this, son. There's a power in discipline, a strength in controlling yourself, not others." The words echoed in his mind, clear as a bell. "He said he was teaching us a lesson," Jimmy said quietly, almost to himself. Big Mike scoffed, trying to regain some semblance of authority. "A lesson? He just got lucky. He's probably some kind of martial arts freak or something. We were just caught off guard." But even as he said it, his eyes darted around, avoiding the gaze of the others. Betraying his own doubt, he knew they hadn't been caught off guard. They had been outmaneuvered, outclassed, without a single real punch thrown by Elvis. "Lucky," Grunt scoffed, holding up his wrist. "My arm still feels like he tied it in a knot. That wasn't luck, that was magic." Slick looked at Jimmy, then at the others. "He moved so smooth, man, like water, and he didn't even try to hurt us. Just made us look like fools." There was a grudging respect in his tone now. This was the core of their stun. It wasn't just that they were defeated, it was how they were defeated. They expected a brawl, a street fight. They expected pain. Perhaps a quick getaway for Elvis. Instead, they got a demonstration of precision, control, and astonishing power that felt almost otherworldly. They were left unharmed, but their pride, their arrogance, and their entire understanding of strength were utterly shattered. They stood there for a long time, the group that had swaggered into the alley minutes earlier, now looking like confused children. The adrenaline slowly faded, replaced by a deep sense of disorientation. The thrill they sought had been found, but it was nothing like what they expected. It was a cold, sobering rush of humility. "So what now?" Knuckles finally asked, his voice subdued. Big Mike ran a hand through his hair, frustration warring with a dawning understanding. He had always been the toughest, the one who took charge. But tonight, he had been made to look like a fool, effortlessly. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. He looked at the empty street where Elvis's car had just disappeared. I gotta figure out what the heck just happened." Jimmy looked up at the stars, which seemed brighter now, clearer. Elvis's words kept playing in his head. "There's a power in discipline, a strength in controlling yourself, not others." He had never thought about strength that way. Strength had always been about hitting harder, intimidating more, taking what you wanted. But Elvis, he had shown a different kind of strength, one that was quiet, profound, and utterly overwhelming. The streetlights cast a dim yellow glow on their faces, highlighting their bewilderment. The air was still cool, but it felt different now, charged with a strange new energy. The swagger was gone. The bravado had evaporated. All that remained was a silent, whispered question hanging in the Memphis night. Who was that man, and what did he just do to us for Jimmy? The answer seemed to Presley deep within him. It wasn't just Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll. It was someone who held a secret power, a silent wisdom that had just shattered their world, not with violence but with a surprising display of grace and control. The memory of the encounter would not fade. It would linger, a haunting, intriguing question mark in their lives, slowly, subtly beginning to change everything. The days that followed the encounter in the alley were strange for Big Mike and his crew. The usual routine felt hollow, the thrill of petty mischief gone. They still met out of habit in their usual haunts, but the energy was different. The swagger was replaced by a subdued quiet, their conversations peppered with confused murmurs about the king. "Did you see him, though?" Slick would say, rubbing his wrist absent-mindedly. "He didn't even look angry, just calm, like he was bored," Big Mike would retort. A flicker of his old anger returning quickly, extinguished by the memory of how effortless it had been. "I tried to hit him, and it was like hitting a brick wall made of butter." Grunt still carried his switchblade, but now he'd take it out, stare at it, and then put it back, a look of profound contemplation on his face. "He disarmed me without even touching the blade," he'd repeat, his voice still tinged with awe. "Just my arm. He made my arm do what he wanted." Jimmy, more than any of them, felt the change deep inside him. Elvis's words, "There's a power in discipline, a strength in controlling yourself, not others," had taken root in his mind like a persistent seed. He found himself replaying the scene over and over, not just the lightning-fast moves, but Elvis's expression, his stillness, his quiet command. He had always looked up to Big Mike, admired his toughness, his willingness to take what he wanted. But what Elvis had shown them was a different kind of toughness, one that didn't rely on fear or aggression, but on an inner strength that seemed unshakable. It was confusing because it challenged everything. Jimmy thought he knew about what it meant to be strong. One afternoon, instead of tagging along with the others on their usual rounds, Jimmy found himself walking past a small Duju's. Its windows dark. He'd walked past it 100 times, always dismissing it as something for nerds or weirdos, but now it held a strange fascination. Was this what Elvis had been doing? Learning this discipline? He thought about the way Elvis had moved, so smooth, so efficient. It wasn't like the brawling he knew where fists flew wildly and bodies slammed. It was like a dance, a dangerous, precise ballet. The others in the gang were struggling too, each in their own way. Big Mike, usually itching for a fight, found himself hesitant. The memory of being so easily overpowered, so casually humiliated, gnawed at him. He tried to rally the boys for a score a few days later, but his heart wasn't in it. And the others, sensing his wavering confidence, were less enthusiastic too. Slick, who used to boast about his quick hands, found himself watching martial arts movies on late-night TV, trying to understand what he'd seen. He'd never been interested in them before, but now he couldn't shake the image of Elvis's hand on his wrist, the subtle twist that had rendered him helpless. Knuckles, the one who relied on brute force, started to question his own methods. What good was raw strength if a man could just make you trip over your own feet without even breaking a sweat? He found himself lifting weights, but with a different focus now, not just to get bigger, but to feel more controlled, more balanced. The gang started to drift apart, subtly at first. Fewer hangouts, more excuses. The unspoken question hung in the air. What was the point? The easy targets didn't feel so satisfying, and the challenges felt too humbling. Jimmy decided he couldn't stand the aimless drifting anymore. He wanted answers. He wanted to understand the discipline Elvis had talked about. He knew he couldn't just walk into the Duju's and sign up. He had no money, no real purpose, other than a vague, unsettling curiosity. But he found himself drawn to quiet places, to parks where he could clear his head. He'd start trying to mimic some of Elvis's movements, the shifts in weight, the calm stances. He knew it was clumsy, but it felt right. A physical way to work through the confusion in his mind. One evening, as he was practicing a clumsy block in an empty lot, trying to remember the way Elvis's arm had deflected Slick's punch, he heard a voice behind him. "You're doing it wrong, kid." Jimmy spun around, startled. It was an old man, thin but with surprisingly strong hands, carrying a grocery bag. He had a kind, wise face, framed by a shock of white hair. Sorry, sir," Jimmy mumbled, embarrassed. "Just trying something." The old man set down his bag. "Trying to find balance, eh?" He smiled. "The arm goes with the body, not against it. Feel the flow like water." Jimmy stared. "How did you know?" The old man chuckled. "I've seen enough clumsy beginners in my time. What makes you interested in this?" Jimmy hesitated, then decided to be honest. I saw someone, he moved like that, like water. And he didn't hurt anyone, but he just made them stop. He called it discipline." A flicker of recognition crossed the old man's face. "Discipline," he repeated. A thoughtful hum in his voice. A powerful word. "Who was this person you saw?" Jimmy bit his lip. He wasn't sure he should say. Then he remembered Elvis's calm eyes, the sense of trust they inspired. It was Elvis Presley. The old man's eyebrows shot up, a genuine surprise in his eyes. He laughed, a warm, rich sound. "The king? Eh? Well, he always was a good student. Learned fast. Had a good heart, too." Jimmy's jaw dropped. You know him?" The old man picked up his grocery bag. "Let's just say I know a thing or two about discipline, and I taught a few folks over the years who had a keen interest in it. Seems like young Elvis learned his lessons well." Turned to walk away, then stopped, looking back at Jimmy. "Remember, kid, true strength ain't about how hard you hit. It's about how much control you got over yourself, mostly." With that, the old man walked off, leaving Jimmy standing there. The echoes of Elvis's words, and now this wise stranger's words ringing in his ears. The king had not only stunned them with his skill, but he had also unknowingly sent one of their own on a new, unexpected path. The seeds of change planted in the chaos of that alley were slowly but surely beginning to sprout. Back at Graceland, Elvis felt the weight of his world settle around him once more. The grand halls, the opulent rooms, the endless stream of visitors, it was a gilded cage, beautiful, but often isolating. He sat in his study, the faint scent of gardenias drifting in from outside, a book on philosophy open on his lap, but his mind was not on the printed word. It was still in that alley under the dim Memphis streetlights. He hadn't felt any anger during the encounter, not even annoyance. Only a quiet sense of duty. A deep-seated desire to protect himself without causing harm. That was the core of his training. The philosophy instilled in him by his sensei, to defeat without injury, to control without cruelty. He thought of the young men's faces. Big Mike's bluster turning to bewilderment, Slick's arrogance melting into confusion, Grunt's fear laced aggression, dissolving into wide-eyed shock. And then Jimmy's face, the youngest, the most impressionable, filled with something akin to awe. It was that face that lingered in his mind. Elvis had always grappled with his immense fame, but the pedestal he was on made him feel distant, untouchable. He yearned to connect, to make a difference, beyond just music. He used his wealth for charity anonymously, helping people in Memphis and beyond. But he wondered if he could do more, something more personal. His karate, his kashukanbo was his secret sanctuary. It was where he could be just Elvis, a student. His sensei, a Japanese Hawaiian master named Ed Parker, had taught him more than just physical techniques. He taught him about inner peace, about the importance of character, about using one's strength for good. Elvis, the true power is not in the punch, but in the control to hold it back, Parker had often said. It is in the discipline of your mind as much as your body. And tonight that lesson had been put to the ultimate test. He hadn't sought out conflict, but when it found him, he had responded not with violence, but with precision and restraint. He had not sought to harm, but to demonstrate, and in doing so he hoped he had planted a seed. Closed his eyes, remembering the flow of movement, the instinctual defense that had taken over. He remembered the feeling of connection, however fleeting, with those young men. They had seen something that night, something beyond the flashy entertainer, something authentic and disciplined. He hoped it would resonate, even if only with one of them. Elvis knew the world was full of lost souls, young men and women struggling to find their way, often falling into destructive paths out of boredom or a lack of guidance. He couldn't save them all, but maybe, just maybe, that one brief encounter, that unexpected display of non-violent strength, could make a difference to a few. He often wondered about his legacy beyond the music, or would they remember the man who tried to live by a code of honor, who sought peace and strength, not just for himself, but to perhaps inspire others. Later that week, Elvis made a call. He called a trusted contact who worked with a local youth outreach program, a program aimed at getting kids off the streets and into constructive activities. "I want to put some money towards expanding your martial arts classes," Elvis said, keeping his voice anonymous on the phone. "And I want to make sure it's open to anyone, especially those kids who might not usually think that kind of thing is for them. Focus on discipline, respect, and self-control, not just fighting." Program director was thrilled, not knowing the famous source of the generous donation. Elvis felt a quiet satisfaction. Couldn't be there in person, couldn't directly guide these young people, but he could provide the means, hoping that the same principles that had grounded him could offer a lifeline to others. He thought of the look on Jimmy's face. Again, he wondered if that boy or any of them would ever seek out such a path. He didn't know, and he would likely never know. But the act itself, the anonymous giving, was enough. It was his way of extending the lesson of the alley, a silent echo of his true strength. The fame would continue to roar, the music would continue to play, but Elvis carried a quiet, hidden purpose within him. Purpose connected to the disciplined movements of his body, the calm of his mind, and the hope that by simply living by his code, even in the shadows, he could inspire a different kind of rock and roll revolution. One of peace, strength, and transformation. He was the king. Yes. But he was also a student, a teacher, and a beacon of quiet strength in a chaotic world. And that, he realized, was a legacy worth more than any crown. Jimmy couldn't shake the old man's word. He always was a good student, learned it fast, had a good heart, too. It reinforced what he had seen, what he had felt. Elvis wasn't just a performer. He was a man with a deep, quiet strength. And it had come from this discipline the old man spoke of. He found himself spending more and more time at the park, trying to mimic the stances and blocks he'd seen. He was clumsy, but persistent. He felt a strange satisfaction in the effort, a focus that had been missing from his life. His friends, Big Mike, Slick Knuckles, and Grunt, noticed the change. "Where you been, Jimmy?" Big Mike asked one afternoon, his voice still a little gruff from the lingering humiliation of the Elvis encounter. "You ain't been hanging out much," Jimmy shrugged. "Just busy thinking," Slick scoffed. "Thinking? Since when do you think, Jimmy? You used to be all about action." "Maybe that's the problem," Jimmy retorted, surprising even himself with the sharpness in his voice. "All action, no thought. Look where it got us with the king." A tense silence fell over the group. The name King still made them squirm. "What's that supposed to mean?" Knuckles demanded, a flicker of his old aggression returning. "It means," Jimmy continued, gathering courage, "we thought we were strong, and then some singer who didn't even punch us made us look like chumps. He showed us a different kind of strength, one where you don't even have to hurt someone to win." He looked directly at Big Mike. "He showed us what discipline looks like, and we had nothing." Big Mike's face darkened. "You saying we're weak, Jimmy?" "I'm saying we're dumb," Jimmy said, his voice quiet but firm. We keep doing the same dumb stuff, expecting different results," he said. "There's a better way, and I believe him." Jimmy walked away, leaving them staring after him, confused. He knew he was taking a risk, challenging their unspoken hierarchy. But he couldn't go back to the old way. He needed to find that different way. A few days later, driven by an insatiable curiosity, Jimmy mustered up the courage to walk into the Memphis Karate Academy. The same old man he'd met in the park was behind the counter, smiling gently. "Well, look who it is," he said, decided to stop just imitating and start learning. "Hey, I want to learn, but I don't have any money." The old man, whose name was Mr. Tanaka, nodded. "I'm in," he said, his voice firm. And so Jimmy began his journey. He started with the basics, learning how to stand, how to breathe, how to focus his mind. It was harder than he imagined, not physically but mentally. It required patience, repetition, and a willingness to be humble. He learned about respect, about courtesy, about self-control. Every time he felt frustrated, he'd remember Elvis's calm face in the alley, the effortless movements, and it would fuel him. Meanwhile, the gang slowly started to unravel. Without Jimmy, their energy felt lower. Big Mike tried to assert his dominance, but his heart wasn't in it. Slick started spending more time at home, watching martial arts movies. Secretly trying to mimic moves he saw. Knuckles started lifting weights more deliberately, aiming for control rather than just bulk. Grunt, surprisingly, found himself drawn to a local boxing gym, drawn to the discipline, if not the philosophy. One evening, Big Mike actually showed up at the do, peering through the windows. He saw Jimmy in his white gi practicing forms with focused intensity. Jimmy moved with a newfound grace and precision, a far cry from the clumsy kid he'd been. Big Mike watched a complex mix of emotions churning within him, a lingering resentment, but also a grudging admiration, and a deep, unsettling sense of having been left behind. He saw the change in Jimmy, the quiet confidence that radiated from him. It wasn't the aggressive, loud confidence of the streets. It was something different, something earned. He remembered Elvis's words, "There's a power in discipline." He was starting to see it, not just in Elvis, but in Jimmy. The king had not only stunned them, he had shown them a different path, even if they hadn't yet realized they were walking it. And for Jimmy, that path was beginning to open up a whole new world. One where strength came from within, not from what you took, but from what you built. Months turned into a year. The Memphis Karate Academy became Jimmy's second home. He excelled in his training not just because of his physical ability, but because of his unwavering dedication. The discipline grounded him, the philosophy gave him purpose. He was no longer the restless, aimless kid who hung out in alleys. He had a focus, a quiet confidence that was a world away from the aggressive bravado of his past. His former friends had scattered. Big Mike had moved away, rumors circulating. He was trying to start fresh in another city. Slick had actually started working a steady job at a local diner, surprisingly finding a knack for customer service. Knuckles was still lifting weights, but had joined a community gym, channeling his energy into organized sports. Grunt was still boxing, but he joined a structured amateur league, finding a healthy outlet for his aggression. The gang, as it was, no longer existed. The encounter with Elvis had, in its quiet way, been the atom bomb that shattered their old world, forcing them to find new paths. Jimmy, now 17, worked part-time at a local hardware store, saving money for college. He also volunteered at the dojo, helping Mr. Tanaka with the younger students, sharing the lessons of discipline and respect. He felt a profound sense of gratitude for the anonymous scholarship that had changed his life, always wondering if it was somehow connected to that night with Elvis. One warm autumn afternoon, Jimmy was helping Mr. Tanaka set up chairs in the community park. The city was hosting a special charity event, a benefit concert for a new youth center that aimed to provide safe spaces and activities for at-risk teenagers. Mr. Tanaka's dojo was putting on a demonstration, and the air buzzed with excitement. A large black Cadillac, the kind only one person in Memphis truly owned, pulled up to the edge of the park. A murmur went through the crowd. Jimmy's heart gave a strange lurch. He knew that car. Elvis Presley stepped out, looking magnificent in a sharp suit. His hair perfectly coiffed, sunglasses shielding his eyes from the afternoon sun. He was there to make a special appearance to lend his star power to the cause. The crowd instantly swelled, a ripple of excitement turning into a roar of adoration. Jimmy froze. A bucket of chairs in his hands. He hadn't seen Elvis since that night in the alley. The king was surrounded by security, by adoring fans, by the usual chaos of his fame. But Jimmy saw past the celebrity to the man who had effortlessly disarmed 5 angry teenagers with grace and control. Elvis, smiling and waving, made his way towards the makeshift stage. He passed surprisingly close to where Jimmy and Mr. Tanaka were still setting up. Jimmy instinctively lowered his head, not wanting to draw attention, but also wanting to observe, to just be a witness. As Elvis walked past, his gaze, even behind the dark glasses, seemed to sweep over the crowd, lingering for just a fraction of a second on Jimmy. Their eyes didn't quite meet, but Jimmy felt it. A fleeting moment of connection, a subtle shift in Elvis's posture. Almost imperceptible was it recognition? Or was it just his imagination? A boy hoping his hero remembered. Elvis continued on greeting a city official, then paused. He turned his head slightly and his sunglasses lifted for just a moment. His eyes, the startling blue of a clear summer sky, met Jimmy's. For a long, silent moment their gazes held. There was no fear in Jimmy's eyes now, no shame, only a profound respect and a deep, unspoken gratitude. And in Elvis's eyes, Jimmy thought he saw a flicker of understanding. A quiet acknowledgement, not a "I remember you from that night" kind of look, but a deeper, more knowing glance. A glance that said, "I see the change in you. I see the strength you found." No words were exchanged. None were needed. Connection was purely spiritual. A silent exchange between two people who had once been on opposite sides of a street and now, through different journeys, found themselves united by a shared understanding of discipline and inner strength. Elvis gave the barest, almost imperceptible nod, a movement so subtle that only Jimmy, looking for it, would have caught it. Then the sunglasses were back on, and he was once again the king, waving to the crowds, his smile bright, his presence commanding. He moved towards the stage, the roar of the crowd growing louder. Jimmy stood still, the empty bucket of chairs now forgotten. His heart hammered in his chest, not from excitement, but from a profound sense of validation. The encounter, brief and wordless, had confirmed something deep within him. Elvis knew. Elvis saw. And the path he had chosen, the path of discipline and control, was the right one. Mr. Tanaka, who had been watching the exchange with a knowing smile, gently nudged Jimmy. "Looks like the king is in fine form today, eh, Jimmy?" Jimmy just nodded, a genuine happy smile finally spreading across his face. "Yes, sir," he said, his voice quiet with emotion. "He certainly is." The music started and Elvis's voice filled the park, rich and powerful. But for Jimmy, the true music was the silent symphony of change, the echo of a lesson learned in a dark alley, now blooming under the Memphis sun. Elvis, from the comfort of his Graceland study, often received reports about the various charities and programs he anonymously funded. He read with interest about the Memphis Youth Center, specifically the success of its martial arts program. The numbers were impressive: increased enrollment, reduced truancy, and even a notable drop in minor street incidents in the neighborhoods surrounding the center. The reports highlighted how the program instilled discipline, respect, and self-control in its participants, helping them turn their lives around. He never asked for names, never sought direct contact. His contributions were given with a pure heart, a desire to do good without drawing attention to himself. Yet sometimes a detail would catch his eye, a turn of phrase in a report about a young instructor or a story of a particularly dedicated student, and he would find himself wondering. After his appearance at the park, Elvis had asked Brad a casual question. "That karate dojo at the park, the one putting on the demo, they seemed good. What's their story?" Red, always efficient, had done some digging. Some of them actually ended up at Tanaka's place, cleaning up their act. Elvis had just hummed a thoughtful sound. He didn't need to ask if it was the same kids. He had a feeling. A deep, quiet satisfaction settled over him. His silent lesson in the alley, the anonymous donation. The hope he had carried, it had blossomed. It was a ripple effect he had wished for, a subtle way to use his strength not just for defense, but for transformation. Meanwhile, Jimmy continued his path. He had become an assistant instructor at the Dews, helping Mr. Tanaka guide new students. He shared his story with them, not naming Elvis directly, but talking about the man who taught him a different kind of strength. He spoke of how strength wasn't about violence, but about discipline, focus, and self-control. I used to think strength was about being tough, about scaring people. Jimmy would tell his students, his voice calm and earnest. But then I learned that real strength is knowing when not to fight. It's about respecting yourself and others. It's about building yourself up, not tearing others down. He saw the faces of the younger students, some of them clearly from backgrounds similar to his own, their eyes wide with understanding. He saw how the lessons of focus and respect resonated. He saw how the physical discipline helped them channel their restless energy. "Good to see you," Jimmy said, returning the smile. "Man, you look different," Slick said, shaking his head. "Good different. What you been up to?" Jimmy chuckled. "Learning about discipline? About what true strength really means?" He paused, then added, "It's something the king taught me." Slick's eyes widened slightly. "The king, you mean that night?" "That night changed everything for me. He didn't just stun us with his moves. He stunned us with what he represented. He showed me that you don't have to be violent to be powerful. You can be strong by being in control." Slick, he donned his hands, then back at Jimmy. "Yeah," he said, his voice quiet. "I've been thinking about that a lot too after that night. Things just didn't feel the same. The old stuff, it just felt empty." He hesitated. "Heard Mike left town. And Knuckles is playing ball, doing good. Even Grunt's boxing now. Training hard, see?" Jimmy said, a sense of warmth spreading through him. "He didn't just stun us, Slick, he set us free." That night, Elvis sat in his music room, strumming his guitar softly. He might be the king, but he was also a man who carried a quiet hope for the world. He played a soulful melody, a tune about finding your way home, about the light within. He didn't need to know the specific names or hear the direct thanks. The knowledge that his actions, born of discipline and a compassionate heart, had sparked a positive change in the lives of those young men was reward enough. His influence, though unseen by most, was a powerful, silent force, weaving its way through the fabric of Memphis, one changed life at a time. It was a heartwarming legacy he was building, far beyond the spotlights and the roaring crowds. Years passed, and Elvis Presley's legend grew etched into the very soul of Memphis and the world his music continued to inspire. His image remained iconic, yet few knew of the quiet, almost spiritual battles he fought, or the subtle ways he tried to leave a positive mark beyond the stage. The incident in the alley remained an untold tale, a private moment of profound impact, known only to a handful of people. Jimmy, now a respected young man in his late 20s, was a full-time instructor at the Memphis Karate Academy. He had gone to community college, pursuing a degree in youth development, all while dedicating his life to the principles he learned from Mr. Tanaka and from Elvis. He was a living testament to the John power of discipline and compassion. He often thought about that night. It was the pivot point of his life. He taught his students not just the techniques, but the philosophy, the importance of respect, self-control, and using strength responsibly. He shared his own story, carefully, respectfully, without ever revealing the identity of the man. He spoke of how a moment of nonviolent power had changed his path and how that same power lay within each of them. His former gangmates had indeed found their own versions of redemption. Slick, the former quick-witted troublemaker, eventually became a successful manager at the restaurant. Maytane, younger employees. Knuckles, through sports, learned teamwork and discipline, eventually becoming a coach for a youth baseball league, teaching kids about fair play. Grunt, after years in amateur boxing, became a personal trainer, helping others build strength and confidence in a healthy way. They might not have fully articulated, but they all carried the silent echo of that night, the memory of being utterly stunned by a power they couldn't comprehend, a power that eventually led them to reevaluate their own lives. He paused at the window, looking out at the Memphis streetlights. A sleek black Cadillac slowly drove by, almost gliding. It was too late for a public appearance, too quiet for an entourage. But Jimmy knew. He had seen that car so many times at a distance over the years. It was Elvis. Car paused momentarily at the corner, its windows tinted, then slowly turned and disappeared into the night. Jimmy smiled to himself. The king was still out there, still moving through the city, a legend in a man carrying his quiet strength. He thought of all the lives that had been touched by the doju, by the anonymous scholarship, by the simple philosophy of inner strength. He thought of his own life, transformed from a path of darkness to one of purpose and light, and it all stemmed from that one unbelievable night. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, had indeed left them completely stunned, not with a fist or a threat, but with an unexpected, breathtaking display of control, grace, and an almost spiritual power. He had shown them that true strength wasn't about domination, but about self-mastery. It wasn't about inflicting pain, but about inspiring change. It was a silent, unwritten chapter in the legend of Elvis Presley. A heartwarming tale of redemption, of second chances, and of the profound impact one compassionate act can have. King had given them more than just a lesson in karate. He had given them a glimpse of their own potential, a path towards a better life. And in doing so, he solidified a legacy far more powerful and enduring than any chart-topping hit, a legacy of light, quietly shining in the hearts of those he had subtly touched, forever changed by the king's silent, stunning display of humanity. The Memphis night might hold its secrets, but the transformed lives of Jimmy and his friends were a living testament to the true, unwavering strength of the king.